When you think you got everything ready, you don't. Hey there, welcome back to my channel, String Things by Mel. My name is Melissa. I'm a stay-at-home mom living in Vancouver, Canada, and on my channel I chat and share everything about my knitting hobby. So, yes, I do know it's been a little bit longer since my last podcast, but life was really lifing and just didn't really have the time or energy to sit down and get a podcast episode at the end of October, the end of the month, like I normally do. End of October is a very busy time for my family. It is, Darcy's birthday, Halloween, and then I also had multiple family members come and stay at our house. So it was just crazy, crazy. Um, Socially, mentally, just kind of had to be on for, more than a week, and I needed to recover after that. Of course, love my family, love the fact that we live in a house and that they can all stay here. But yeah, I'm tired. It's tiring hosting multiple people. So, but finally have a chance today. Darcy's at school right now, and I feel rested enough. That's going to be, being a mom, being, your sleep depends on your child. So I don't know if I ever feel fully rested. And so, yes, don't want to sound like a broken record, but that's just kind of how life is right now. So, the good thing is that even though I haven't really been posting on social media a whole bunch, didn't have, any extra videos going out, I have been busy knit-wise. And so I have 3 finished objects to share. And as I'm saying that, I realize I left one upstairs. And so I'm going to have to go grab that. All right, so I'm going to start off with my double felted slippers. This was a WIP in my last podcast episode, and I have finished them. This is a free pattern from Sandus Garn. The English translation, is roughly double felted slippers. I'll put a link in the description if you are interested in making these. But they kind of looked like bunny ears. And the reason why they're double is that it's double layered and you slip kind of one into the other. I'm not going to take mine apart to show you that because I've already worn these. These are, kind of felted and blocked, so I don't really want to wreck the kind of form, foot form that I have created. But here they are. This is Briggs Little Regal in the color soft brown. This is the same yarn I used for my must-have cardigan, which is one of my early knits, early garments that I've ever knit. I want to say it's been like at least a couple years, maybe 3 years ago, I made that cardigan. But I had a whole bunch of yarn and I still have yarn left over. It's a really affordable yarn. It is a Canadian wool, comes from a Canadian mill on the East Coast. And so the felting process, I think that's what most people are curious about. But I just want to quickly show that you can kind of see a little bit of like stitch still, like it's not completely 100% like a solid felted fabric. So I was, a little bit scared. I think most people would be if you're going to intentionally felt something. We work so hard not to felt our projects and, all of a sudden you want to. I wasn't quite sure how the process was going to go, so I decided to take it a bit slow. And so for my washing machine, I have a top loading washer here, and I decided to just go with the like light cycles, which is like a shorter in terms of duration. What that means in terms of agitation, I'm not sure. I'm still using like a regular wash cycle. And so the first cycle, I put these in, you put them in like flat, like they're still like bunny ears, like don't turn them into a slipper when you do the felting process. And the first cycle, nothing happened. But you know what? It's because I forgot to change the water temperature. I still had it on cold water. So I changed it to warm. And so my washing machine, even though like the washing water, you can change the temperature to, the rinsing water is always cold. I don't have any control over that. And so the second time I put them in the wash and I chose warm water, still nothing really happened. And so I decided to go with a hot cycle, again, still having the cold rinse water. And the overall length of my slipper decreased by a couple centimeters. So not a huge change in size. So for reference, I made size a 38-39, which is a 25 centimeter length, finished length. Before felting, the overall length of my slipper was 31.5 centimeters. So I needed to go down 6.5 centimeters. The third cycle, again, decided to go just with the regular instead of a light, so putting it in the washing machine for longer. So changing it from, say, heavy to regular to light does change the duration. I don't know how that changes in terms of the actual agitation during the wash cycle in my machine. But the third time this went into the washing machine, the size reduced down to 27 centimeters. And so that's pretty close. And it's a 2 centimeter difference from the second wash to the third wash. And knowing that I needed a 25 centimeter length, I decided to just kind of do the same cycle again, except I did light. I don't know why my process was thinking that way, but again, I think fear came in and was like, well, I don't want to have them too small. And because once it's felted, it's really gonna not be very stretchy, right? So I did a light hot cycle for my fourth and my final cycle, and I got down to 25.5 centimeters, and I figured close enough. If I happen to be wearing socks underneath at the time, that's fine. I'd rather them be a little bit too big than too small. So I decided to stop there. And so once I got to about, 25 centimeter overall length, I did do measurements of like the width and everything, but those aren't provided in the pattern about, how wide the foot should be, like any other measurements. But I did kind of mark those down, and everything kind of shrunk down by about a couple centimeters in each direction, except for the length, because I started at 31.5 and I've gone down to 25.5 centimeters. But they fit. And so what I did was I, flipped them, folded it into the slipper, and I did put my foot in them briefly. I was not, I didn't put like a bag over my foot or anything. I just was like, put them over my feet. And then walked around my house for a little bit, like took a few steps, and then just let them kind of dry as is over top of the air vents. I have forced air in the house, so we have the vents in the floor. So I got like a little standing rack. It's like a shelf organizer from my kitchen, and I put that right over the vent and let them dry just like this. And they came out fine. So difference in terms of what I did in construction versus the pattern. In the pattern, you cast on and start working in the round, and that kind of opening you'll have to close by seaming later. I decided to do a Judy's Magic cast on just to avoid the seaming. And then as well for the instep area, you do some cast on stitches to be able to start working. So you start from this end and then you cast on stitches here so that you can work in the round for the foot. And so I did that for like the first layer. And then the second layer, I picked up stitches from that first bit of cast on, again, to avoid seaming later. I don't think this really makes a difference in terms of how well the felting process goes. I just didn't want to seam. So that was my reasoning for it. Wow, there's like one of Tiberius's claws in my slipper. Um, yeah, it's one of his shed claws. Anyway, I will say though that if you have a high instep, so like if your foot rises a lot or you have a wide ankle, you may want to adjust the pattern a bit. So if you have a wider ankle, maybe cast on more stitches than the pattern says. Or if you just don't want it to be so tight fitting around there, maybe adjust the number of rows or the rounds that you do before you get to the part where you separate to do the tops of the feet. So those would be my recommendations in terms of adjusting the size that way. But you know, I've only done this once. I don't know what the exact science is for felting, like in terms of each direction, how much does it shrink? You could probably go a little crazy and do a lot of experimentation that way. I feel like I'm just, you know, felt lucky that I just did it and I didn't overfelt it. Fits my foot. I can get it on pretty easily, on and off. It doesn't feel like super tight around my ankle, but I have skinny ankles and I have a lower instep, so these work really well for me as is. I will say though that on the edges, so if you can imagine this was like the flat, like a single slipper flat when it looked like ears. I will say the corners here that you like fold in together is a bit bulky. Like I was able to block it out and like shape it right, but I feel like there's almost too much, like a little bit of extra fabric here. You can see how it's quite square there rather than being like rounded around the heel. But I also didn't want that bulk to be right under my heel, just for comfort in walking. So I'm not sure how to. I could change maybe the number of stitches at the cast on and kind of like increase out or something like that. I don't know. I don't need multiple slippers, so I don't think I'll be making more slippers for myself anyway. I am considering making a pair for my husband, although he's not really one to complain about cold feet. And even for myself, where we used to live in the apartment, it never really got cold enough that I wanted to wear slippers. Um, we did have concrete floors, but being in an apartment, you're insulated by other units. Here in the house, though, you definitely feel there is a difference in the floor, even though we have wood floors. Definitely in the sunroom when the heated floors aren't on, it is chilly on the feet there. So yeah, so the need for slippers really came about recently after moving into this house. But maybe I'll make some for Darcy. I don't know. She has slippers already, so this might be, you know, the beginning and the end of my felted slipper journey. Um, Oh, depending on what flooring you have in your house. So for me, I have pretty smooth hardwood floors throughout, upstairs, downstairs. These are slippery. If I'm not careful, I worry about hyperextending my knee or something. Might tear my ACL or just trying to walk in these. So, I don't run around in my house in these. I've heard of some people putting kind of like silicone dots or sewing on some sort of, a different kind of more grippy fabric on the bottom. I probably won't do that because I just don't really want to put in any more effort into these slippers. They're fine as is for me. And I just know to be careful and not try to, really bust a move in these on my floor. But overall, happy with the process. They fit great. They're comfortable. They're soft. There's enough cushioning on the bottom, for me, for my comfort. But there we go. Sandiscarn double felted slippers. Next up, let's talk about my Melides dress. This, yes, to date, longest, I don't want to say like intense because I don't want to put anyone off from making this dress, but definitely the longest project to date I have ever made in terms of knitting garments. The testing process, I think it started back in June. I want to say, do I have any notes on this? in this book. But yeah, I want to say it took about 5 months. And so, yeah, we were given, a lot of time. Like the test group was given a lot of time to work on this. We also got an extension because not all of us, like myself included, did not make the original deadline date. Um, that was mostly for the people making like the longer length of the dress. Like I have a maxi length, I would say, almost maxi, like midi to maxi length. There was also some issues, people having to kind of drop out because of, wrist pain. Some people, life is happening. Life was happening a bit for me too, like the whole moving process, as well. But I am really happy with the result. I'm glad I stuck with it. I didn't have any real significant finger or wrist pain, but it definitely was a project that I had to limit myself on how much I would knit per day. In the beginning, it definitely was on and off knitting because I was working on other projects. But once we got closer to fall, once we got closer to the deadline, I kind of had to like up the knitting time on it so that I could finish it. Originally, I thought, oh, it'd be kind of nice if I finished this for a wedding anniversary because that was right around the time of the original deadline, and then that just wasn't going to happen. So I do have plans to wear this at my husband's work Christmas party, which is 1 week from now. So very excited. Last year I wore my Audrey top but a dress. So I guess now am I going to be knitting a dress to wear for every Christmas party? I don't know. I don't actually need that many dresses in my wardrobe. So again, like just because I can make it doesn't mean I should do it. And that's not, knitting is supposed to be a slow craft. It's a hobby. I don't need to be making excess clothing items for my wardrobe. But I'll pop up some pictures and video of it because I'm obviously not wearing it. I forgot to say that I'm wearing my Levitate wrap today. My first version of it, I have two of these. This one is Cascade Ecological wool in the size extra small. It needs some depilling. But this is one of my favorite garments to wear. It's just easy, throw it on. I feel like it instantly levitates my look, even though I'm sitting at home, casual. I could, leave the house and go run errands in this and not feel like frumpy or whatever. But yeah, it's an undyed wool. It's bulky weight, just held single for this. And yeah, one of my most worn garments. So back to the Melides dress. Um, let's go over kind of maybe what to expect from the pattern. So this is not the first actual release of the Melides dress. This is Melides Dress 2.0. The pattern had been released before. This testing process was for the additional sizes and just a little bit of rewording, a little bit of reformatting of the original pattern. I don't know what the original version looked like. But I'm just grabbing here for reference so I can look at it. There are a lot of measurements that you need to do, but this is because this is a dress that you want to fit just like bang on. So when you take your measurements, the dress is meant to fit with like no ease. So not positive, not negative. Um, Especially given the fabric that it's silk, you're not going to get a lot of stretch out of it, so you don't want to do a lot of negative ease. You could get away with a little bit potentially because it is kind of like you can button it up. Mine, I can actually slip over my head with all the buttons done up, so that's nice. And I'm going to show a picture from the pattern because this does not reveal anything about, things that, you know, only people that pay for the pattern should see. But I want to show the schematic that's included in the pattern because it is just the level of detail and just the visuals. Like, I just love when schematics are included in patterns. I feel like they should be included in every pattern. Um, but I'll show you this, which is the schematic of the dress. And there are, all these markings here for different places that you're going to measure on your body. And these are the measurements that you will note down on the next page. So there's kind of like a worksheet included in the pattern. And you measure, say, bust circumference, your waist circumference, high hip, and your hip. And then there's some different lengths that you're going to measure. And those are important because those are going to lead you to, how many rows you're going to knit depending on your actual measurement. So there's tailoring factor you're going to see included in the language for this pattern. And then you kind of have your own kind of formula that you're going to refer to. So also included in the pattern is a very detailed, the measurements here. Hey, buddy. So lots of measurements included in the sizing chart, both in metric and imperial. And the real beauty of this pattern is that, excuse me, you want to look out the window. Okay. Hopefully that doesn't blow out the light too much. No, it's okay. The real beauty of this pattern is that you don't need to choose a single size. You can actually mix and match because maybe you have a large bust, small waist, or maybe the opposite, but you can really pick and choose kind of the measurements based on your actual body, and then the pattern will guide you how to transition between those parts of the dress. So for example, my dress is picks from 4 different sizes in the chart, and then it just like it gets blended seamlessly through because the instructions tell you how to do, whether you need to do more increases or decreases. So when it comes to measuring your body, I would recommend if you have someone that can help you with measuring, do that. If you don't plan on wearing a bra, then measure yourself without a bra. I knew which bra I would be wearing, so I measured myself, in my underwear with a said bra. And I did it by myself because my husband's usually away for work during the day, and I'm pretty comfortable and know how to take my measurements by myself. Although I think I did have to get my husband's help for some of the over the shoulder bodice measurements. And so based on my measurements, I was choosing measurements from, size 2 up to a size 5. There are 26 sizes included in the sizing chart because that's just how precise and tailored the dress can be for yourself. Something that happened that's kind of interesting from the time I measured myself in June to getting to the point of finishing my dress, I had actually lost some weight. And so when it came to the blocking process, I had to be just careful not to like really overstretch because my bust circumference came down a little bit. Maybe it's just, hormones, or maybe just, I think I overall just lost weight. Was not trying to, but it happens. Um, Unfortunately, like, hopefully I like gained back some of that weight. I don't know. Anyway, so that happened. But luckily the dress still fits great. Now, the actual like starting of the dress. Um, so it can be worn whether the buttons with a V-neck opening in the front, or you can have this square neck, no buttons as the front. I'm not quite sure how it works out though if you have a significant difference, say in your bust to your waist, or because you can have some bust shaping. Bust shaping is included in the pattern, but I don't know what that looks like when you have that like turned to the back. I don't know. I would ask the designer about that because I didn't have to do any bust shaping because I'm pretty flat, and it works for me, in either orientation. But in terms of construction, I don't know if you can see it here, the line. So you start kind of just above this line and you work the bodice from the waist up and flat because this is a buttoned up garment. Although there are some people, I'm not sure if it actually happened, but there were some people in the test group kind of discussing about knitting it in the round, but I don't know for sure if anyone actually went forward with that. So you start with a provisional cast on from approximately like the waist. And this is where some people have some difficulties when their gauge changes. And this is something that could have happened, prior to this version of the test. It's just something that happens with a provisional cast on. Depending on how you do it, your stitches may relax. And so there is a little note in the pattern that, after you've knit a few rows, like double check your gauge. And as part of the swatching and the gauge, finding your gauge process goes for this pattern, you do want to note down your gauge before and after blocking, and that's noted in the pattern. It's just helpful for reference as well, just to know if things are going on track or not, because this is, very fine yarn. These are small needles that you're working with. You don't want to find out until, weeks later that you've been knitting off gauge. So how I do my provisional cast on is that I use two separate cable needles, circular needles, fixed ones, interchangeable ones, doesn't matter. I just make sure I use two different ones. I've got a lot of needles, so easy enough for me to do. I know not everyone has a very large stash of needles, but I did use two separate 3mm circular needles, one for the actual stitches that I was going to be working on this way, and then the stitches that you have kind of like on hold or that are provisionally cast on remain on the other cable needle to be worked on later when you start working the skirt portion. And I find when I do it like that, my provisional stitches, don't stretch out. It's a good kind of anchoring to start off with for my work. And I did not have to restart. I know some people had to restart after the provisional cast on work on the rows and found out their work was just like way too long. I didn't have to do that, luckily. But that is something I knew going in that can happen with a provisional cast on. So that's my other little tidbit for you guys if you are going to do this dress. Otherwise, everything else, pattern is great. I did not hit row gauge. So I had stitch gauge, but I did not have row gauge, but that's not a major problem depending on how far off you are. So the row gauge for the pattern is 31 rows, and mine after blocking is about 39. So I'm quite a bit off, but it also worked out to be like a really nice percentage off. And there is like a formula and references in the pattern. If you are off by row gauge, it does help you with that. So yes, there's some extra math involved when you're off by your row gauge is off, but the pattern helped me out in all areas. You really need to get stitch gauge though. There's nothing to say like if you are off stitch gauge so and so, like there's none of that in the pattern, but row gauge there is some help. And the only part that I had to kind of like really figure out on my own was for the V-neck for the front, because of my difference in my row gauge. That meant because we're working up this way, my decreases had to occur at a different rate than the original pattern rate. So I knew the number of stitches that I was kind of starting at, and I knew the number of stitches I wanted to finish at. So the width of my straps are the same as what the pattern says. So I didn't change any stitch counts that way. Um, but I did put it in a spreadsheet because I think better in Excel spreadsheets, and kind of mapped out my decreases that way, knowing how many rows based on my row gauge I needed to do to get to this point, and kind of just like fit in my decreases at kind of like a nice even rate, whether they were on the wrong side or right side, just fit them in where I needed, and I think it worked out really well. I did double check with the designer to make sure I was going through the right thought process, because I think that's also important to discuss because it was in the pattern how to adjust for that, and I just wanted to make sure I was reading her pattern correctly, and I was, so then that was good. That meant her instructions were clear enough for me to work that all out on my own. So yeah, so you work the bodice from the waist up. You do a Kitchener stitch seaming for the straps. I think some people did 3 needle bind off because they were concerned about strength. I decided to just do the Kitchener bind off as per pattern because I know you come back later and do I-cord, and I feel like the I-cord hopefully adds enough strength there if you're worried about stretching in that area. I also know that over time, perhaps, or maybe before it happens, some knitting elastic could be sewn into the armhole or the straps as well to help with that if you're at all concerned. Then once you're done the bodice, then you start working from your provisional cast on, from the waist down, and then so you do this little waist detail and then work your way down, and then there are increases that you do every so number of rows. Mine was a little bit different because again, because of my row gauge. But you continue the nice little, almost like faux seam that you see on the bodice. These kind of lines continue all the way down the skirt. And so I also continue doing the skirt increases pretty much all the way down to the bottom of the dress. And then the bottom of the dress is finished with, let's see, is it called linen stitch? But it's a nice kind of like secure, prevents the fabric from rolling. And it's just a nice kind of like thin, lighter way to finish it versus I-cord. I know I-cord is used on the upper bodice and the armholes. I appreciate that I-cord is not on the bottom. It just has a really nice, clean, minimal look to it. So once you finish all the knitting, you're not done because there's the finishing steps, which is the I-cord and the buttons. So even though I didn't hit row gauge, I still chose the option of not actually knitting any buttonholes. I did choose smaller buttons to accommodate, the fact that I have a different row gauge. So if you hit row gauge, the recommended button size is 9 millimeters. But given that my row gauge was different and I have more rows per 10 centimeters, that means I have like a shorter space for a button to fit through. I decided to buy 7 millimeter buttons, and I did check with my swatch to see if the button can pass through in between the stitches, and it does. So do keep that in mind as well if you are going to change button sizes. There is instructions if you want to actually create buttonholes, but I decided to forego that because I also wasn't sure. I was having difficulty deciding on what kind of buttons. I didn't really know ultimately if I was going to find small enough buttons of one size. Yeah, it was a thing. But I ended up buying buttons from one of my go-to Etsy shops. She's based in Quebec. I'll put a link to the buttons I purchased. And they're just like regular mother of pearl, all fairly even in color and shape and size. So they're probably, machine made. They're not like vintage ones. Although originally I thought I was going to use the vintage ones, but I didn't have enough. So I ended up using, how many buttons do I have here? 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16. I have 24 buttons on mine, and my buttons don't go all the way to the bottom. I intentionally wanted to leave an opening, like a slit, one for just comfort in walking, and to reduce stretching of the skirt itself, which is something I found with my Audrey dress. That one has no openings or slits in it, and I measured the skirt portion before blocking, after blocking, and after wear, and it has like stretched out widthwise. So I wanted to avoid that. I also thought just kind of like add a little sauciness there, having an opening, whether it's in the front or the back. I like the look, and there was another tester who did that look as well. So it's nice to see I was not the only one that was thinking about it. But the finishings, there are links to some reels that the designer herself made, to apply the I-cord finishing on to this. There is kind of like a final reinforcing step. So you apply the I-cords, and then there's a reinforcing step of coming back with a crochet hook and doing some crochet slip stitches all the way along the actual button band. So not on like the upper neckline, but like, sorry, my dress is so huge, but like the straight portion of the button band, you reinforce it, and then you're supposed to do another reinforcement step, which I skipped. One, because everything is one color, it was just a little bit hard to see where I was supposed to put my crochet hook. And I'm not a newbie crocheter either. And then I also felt that where I picked up my stitches to make my I-cord, I have more of a like a bigger selvage area. And by that I mean like this part that when you pick up and the fabric kind of folds over. I feel like I have a little bit more, a little extra, because I picked up probably inwards more. Also because of, I realized that I lost a little bit of weight and was trying to make my dress like slightly smaller. So doing that last reinforcement step seemed like it wasn't really gonna help me out. I personally felt it was not necessary. I did mention that to the designer, like I skipped that. Also, like time wise, I was like, I was definitely not going to fit the extended deadline if I had to figure out how to do that final reinforcement step. So I skipped it. Um, is that something that, that the dress really needs? Is it something that's going to develop later? I don't know. But I thought I'd just share that. When it came to actually sewing on the buttons, that was totally fine. Make sure, as the pattern says, to actually count the rows between your buttons. Don't just eyeball it. Count the rows to make sure you're putting the buttons on evenly. And yeah, so I didn't have any buttonholes, so I did have to make sure, to be careful to get the buttons in the right spot. And I'm lucky enough that I actually can get this on and off without undoing any of the buttons, so I don't touch the buttons anymore. They were a little bit of pain to do up the first time because they are so tiny. But now they're on, and hopefully they stay for good. Which makes me wonder, it's like, oh, could I have just knit this all in the round? But no, it's fine. So yeah, sorry, lots of information on it, but it's a very detailed pattern, lots of details. I know it's offered at, a higher price than your typical sweater pattern, but there's a lot of help in there. And the result, everyone fits their dress. Like everyone looks so good in their dresses from a test group, and everyone had, positive things to say about it. Don't be afraid to do it. It's not difficult knitting. The difficulty lies in the duration, how long it takes. And yes, the size of the needle, and knitting with 100% silk is hard on the hands. But if you don't rush yourself, you do a bit here and there, you can make yourself a knit dress. So I will try really hard to remember to take photos of myself wearing this at the Christmas party. Last year, completely forgot to because we were enjoying happy hour too much, and then we were almost late to the Christmas party. Hence, no stopping to take photos before, and then just like busy socializing during the Christmas party. So hopefully, I do a better job this year. Um, but yeah, I really want to get some pictures of me in a knit dress because not very often I wear one. And I don't see myself making another one anytime soon, so let's do better about documenting it, right? All right, final finished object to share with you guys is a test knit that I was working on at the same time as the Melides dress. Yeah, I'm done with test knitting for the year. I'm done with like pushing myself too much for deadlines. Speaking of which, foreshadowing, my next thing I will talk about, my WIP after this one. But yes, I am not going to sign up for any more test knits this year. Hopefully not early next year. I need to just like slow my roll. Actually slow down. I'm gonna actually slow down. I'm gonna try after my next WIP, which I'll discuss. So the Clara Sweater, I don't know the actual release date for it. The designer has not told us an exact date. But today, November 15th, the pattern has not been released yet. I have not trimmed off the ends yet. Like this is blocked. It's good, but haven't had a chance to trim my ends yet. So I signed up to knit size 2, which gives me kind of like the minimum amount of recommended ease for this. I feel like I should have, like this style of it, I should have done a size 3. It's still wearable. It still looks cute, but I feel like it might have been better as a size 3, but it's okay. I enjoyed knitting this up. Let me get my notes here. Okay, so on knit size 2, I'm using a combination of a fingering weight yarn and a fluffy yarn. My fingering weight yarn is Knit Picks Palette in the Bear Undyed because I have a ton of it. And using Sunday Fibre Co. Cumulus Mohair in the color Unicorn. And you just get this really subtle, Unicorn itself is a really like pastel, subtly variegated, subtly, is that a word? Variegated colorway that Elise has. I don't know if I'll be able to show you, kind of see it. I'll insert some separate shots of it so you guys can see it. But what drew me to want to test this sweater was the use of the cables on the neckline, on the end of the cuffs, and running down the back, the shoulder line into the body. It's just a different look. And now that I've seen it, this is not a unique thought. Vertknit designer, same designer for Melides Dress. Her citrine jumper has cables going on there. Veronica Lindbergh or Kudivakika in her new book. She's got a sweater with cables on the neckline and the cuffs as well. Is this a trend now? I don't know. I don't know trends. I don't follow trends. I just note my observations. But this is a top-down drop shoulder constructed sweater. And what do I have to say to this? You could knit this with a single strand of DK as well. I was able to hit gauge on this one. It's knit on 4mm needles. I knit this exactly as per pattern. The only modification I have made is that I made my sleeves longer, and they're quite significantly longer. So for size 2, sleeve length in the pattern schematic is noted to be 42 centimeters. My sleeve length is 53 centimeters. I knew while knitting this up, just seeing that number, even though it's drop shoulder and you gain a little bit of length from that drop shoulder, I just knew I was going to need more sleeve length. And it's not like I wanted to make super extra long sleeves. For me, like my cozy sleeve length hits me. I like to aim for the thumb knuckle or kind of like this area here. So not over my fingers, but just enough that I could like hold, grip my sleeves. That's like my cozy sleeve length. Whereas say my Levitate wrap that I'm wearing right now, it's just a regular sleeve length, not bracelet length, just regular. Hits me right at the wrist. So that is a significant difference. Um, I wouldn't say I have extremely long arms, but I tend to need to increase sleeve length on some patterns. Another difference I have is for the neckline, the collar. So the pattern does tell you how many stitches to pick up. If you don't pick up the same number of stitches, it does need to be a multiple of 5 because of the cable repeats around. I actually have 2 extra cable repeats. And thank goodness, because at first I almost couldn't get this over my head. So because cabling is not as stretchy as say like the typical 1x1 or 2x2 rib that you're going to see on most necklines, and this the bind off style that was used, and the discovery that I guess I'm really tight tension. I have really tight tension when I bind off. Did not, I could barely get it off my head. Not everyone had this issue. So this is a tension issue on my end. So the instructions for the neckline are correct. We follow them. But I just have a really tight tension. So I had to switch. So I still use the same bind off method as instructed in the pattern, but I didn't size down a needle like the pattern said. Some people had the opposite problem, so this is why in the pattern it says to size down a needle to do the bind off. Some people actually had the flaring out. Not a problem for me. My friend Sarah, Noelle Knits, she was in the test group as well, and she followed the pattern exactly, same needles and everything, and she didn't have any flare out, and she didn't have anything like too tight. She's like the perfect knitter. She doesn't have row out. She doesn't have issues like that. Like, I wish I could knit like Sarah. But you can see for me, I don't have any flaring out. I think my ends look pretty good. But I just did not size down in needles. So 3.5mm needles used to do the cabling on the cuff, and that's what I continued to use to do the bind off. And so I had to go back and redo my bind offs for the neckline and the body. I had figured out this tight tension issue before I had done the sleeves, so I didn't have to redo the sleeves. I just knew I needed to go up a needle size. But yeah, doing the whole body, because what happened was that my body was so tight, even after blocking, I I didn't even want a chance trying to block it and see if it was gonna like stretch out more. Like, no. So I did go back and frog out my bind off and redid it, and it's good now. I knew I was having a problem when it wasn't like going past my hips, and based on the measurements for size 2, I knew that the circumference is larger than my hips, so I was like, okay, something's off here. But so other than my sleeve length being longer, my sweater is pretty much on point in terms of blocking to the measurements or in the pattern. My length is a little bit longer, which I feel like maybe my row gauge changed a bit between from knitting flat to knitting in the round. But for me, that works out. So the length of the sweater in the pattern for size 2 is 45.5 centimeters. And mine is 5 centimeters longer, or a couple inches. And that works for me because I have a little bit of a longer torso, and I wanted to make sure it covers kind of like my waistband of my jeans, even though I do wear high-waisted pants, bottoms. I think it worked out well for me, and thank goodness I redid that bind off because the bottom of the sweater, the circumference is matches the chest circumference as well. So I don't have that weird issue. It does still feel like tight. There's no stretchiness to it, again, because cabling is not stretchy. And you've got the kind of like silk core of the mohair strand. Like, it's really like there's no give to it. So like putting the sweater on and off does feel kind of weird because there's no stretch there. Same with the neckline. But it looks fine. It just feels, the experience of taking it on and off is just different from my usual sweaters. So I guess that's kind of like something to consider if you are doing any sort of sweater with cabling on the neckline or the body or the cuffs versus the typical 1x1 or 2x2 ribbing. So because this is not released yet, I don't know, like, some of this stuff that I say will apply or not, but there were no like major issues in the pattern, none that I found anyways for my size. Like I said before, I followed the pattern to a T except for sleeve length. And in the pattern, there are kind of like help if you need to modify your sleeve length. There's actually help there figuring out whether you want to actually change where your decreases are for your sleeve. I decided not to do that. I tend to just leave decrease rates alone and just keep knitting to a sleeve length of my choice. I don't think it's very noticeable. But yeah, I tend to not mess with decrease rates if I don't need to. It hasn't been a problem for me, so that's why I just leave it. But that is the Clara sweater from Carissa CL Knits. And if the pattern happens to get released before or by the time I upload this video, I'll include a link to the pattern for you guys. Wow, okay. And the downside of, a longer time between recordings is the videos are longer. So I don't know, some people like longer videos, some people don't. My voice certainly does not. So let's move on to some WIPs. Actually, I'm going to only share one. Some of them are just like, they've been going on and on and on forever. It's not a huge update. Like Sweet Shop Blanket. I knit up 2 squares. There you go. There's the update on the Sweet Shop Blanket. But I was kind of saying, I was foreshadowing about, giving myself deadlines, and I need to stop that. So I mentioned that I'm going to my husband's for Christmas party next week, and I'm trying to knit something to wear for that night over top of my Melides dress. So it can be a little bit chilly in the beginning of the night, and I'm just worried about being chilly in a silk dress. Um, so I'm knitting something that looks like the George sweater by Colibri. Put a picture up. Now, I did not purchase the pattern because of some comments on Ravelry. Unfortunately, negative comments saying, the pattern it's not well written. I think one person even said that they like regret buying the pattern. So I didn't want to take a chance, and I decided to kind of make it up myself, but not completely make it up myself. So it's a top-down raglan with like a wrap in the back and a nice bow. And I like the overall like design of it, and I like the idea of it, especially with the Melides dress I plan on wearing with the buttons in the back. I thought it would just look really nice. They would go well together. So I am using the Autumn League pullover pattern from Two of Wands. The web version is free. You can also purchase a PDF. It's kind of my go-to top-down raglan pattern. I really like it. I've made it 4 times now. I like that there is a bit of like a compound raglan there. What that means is that the rate of increasing in the raglans is different. And within each size, there's a little bit of like shaping of the raglan towards the armhole, from like the neck to the armhole there. It's just a nice gauge to knit at as well. So I decided to kind of match the gauge, and I'm using the numbers from the size extra small. But because I'm knitting flat, because I've got an opening in the back, I just started a little bit differently. So I'll show you what I have done so far, and I'll get into what my modifications are. And because this pattern, there's a free web version, I'm just gonna talk about it freely. So first, the yarn. It's fluffy, it's white, it's not mohair, it's not brushed alpaca. It is the brushed merino that was kindly gifted to me by Meagan-Bramble Ridge. I was gifted 2 skeins of this yarn. This is the undyed base, and it's 100% brushed merino with a nylon core. Each skein has about 600 meters. And I have 2. And I decided I'm holding this single-stranded. This is my swatch on 4.5mm needles, which is the same needle size used for the Autumn League pullover. And yeah, same gauge as the pullover as well. I thought I wanted to try doing it with larger needles and doing something a little bit more airy, but it just wasn't quite the look that I wanted. It was just a bit too open. I didn't want the whatever color I would be wearing underneath this to like really show through. Like I didn't want it to be that sheer. So I decided to go with the same gauge as the pullover pattern. Also, it just felt a little awkward. I tried swatching with 5.5mm needles, and even though it'd be very quick, it's just like a little bit too large to work with. So one of the things I wanted to ensure in terms of the fit of the neckline is that I didn't want this really coming up high. I don't like it when things are like right on my neck. Um, but I also didn't want to have to do short rows. And another thing that I like about the Autumn League pullover pattern is that it has a staggered start to create the neckline. So you have a neck where the back is higher than the front, and that's achieved without short rows. It's achieved by starting your work flat, and then later casting on the center front stitches of the front neckline, and then joining them around. So you start flat. Now for me, because the entire project needs to be flat, but I also want to do that staggered start, I had to start my project kind of in 2 sections. So I started with the Did I start with the right front or the left front? I'm gonna consult my notes here. I did the left front. So I cast on the stitches for the left front, omitting all the back stitches except for one. So it'd be the same number of stitches that you cast on for the size extra small of the Autumn League pullover, but only one for the back. And my raglans are only one stitch rather than two stitches. So that's what's different there. So for extra small, you would cast on, I believe it's 66 stitches. But for myself, I cast on 16 stitches. So I had one stitch for the back, one stitch for each of the two raglan lines, 12 stitches for the shoulder, and one stitch for the front. And then from there, just followed the pattern exactly, like in terms of the increase rate, and where to do the increases, until I reached the point where in the instructions where you would cast on these front stitches. So then I put the left front on hold and then cast on the same way for the right front, and again followed the Autumn League pullover instructions until I reached the point where I'd cast on and then cast on the front stitches and joined it to my left front. So then now I have it all in one piece. And then again, still just follow the pattern exactly in terms of the increases. And for the back opening, in terms of increase placement, I kept increasing along the raglan line as per pattern, but I didn't increase on this edge of the fabric so that I have a nice almost straight line down the back. So I'll have like a nice opening. So follow the pattern to the point where you separate for body and sleeves. And at that point is when I started increasing on this side of the fabric in the back, because now I've joined the body. So there's no increases in the underarm here. I'm now just doing one increase on every right side row until I reached my desired length. And so I've already reached my desired length and I've finished it off with an I-cord using the same size needles. So now, next step for me is that I am going to do the I-cord along the neckline and the opening. And then once that is done, then I will come back. So this is from looking at the back, and this is the opening here. Once I reached my desired kind of like back width or my circumference, I will come back and pick up stitches here and work in this direction to create the ties for the bow. Because that's just what made sense to me rather than trying to work out. Like, could you imagine working flat and then like also doing the tie? Like, oh, yeah, no. So there will be a change in direction of the knitting, and given how fluffy it is and the fact that it is going to have like a bow tie in the back, I don't think this like pickup line stitches is going to be very noticeable. If it is, oh well. But that's the plan. So that's about almost a 10 centimeter width for the tie for the bow. I wanted it to be like a big fluffy bow. And the plan is to knit I-cord edges on either side of the ribbon ties as I knit it so that I don't have to go back and, do an I-cord edge after. I'm just going to do it at the same time. If you've done this Sophie shawl from Petite Knit, it's like that. And so yeah, I will knit the ties for as long as I need to. And then at the end of the ties, I will do some decreases. So there's a nice like little point. And yeah. Oh, and then I need to do the sleeves. So I think once I do the I-cord on the kind of like the neckline, then I will do the sleeves. Because I find that once you apply your collar, that kind of adjusts, you get a better picture of where your shoulder is going to sit, and then you can do then you do your sleeves and get the right length. Although this is something with an open back and it's so light, there's not a lot of weight to it, so I'm hoping I'm not gonna have issues where it's just falling off my shoulders all the time, but we will see. Only time will tell. If it is something that ends up sitting really wide, it's kind of okay because of the purpose of this garment is just for a little bit of warmth over top of a dress. It's not something I would really wear on its own. Um, but yeah, that is what I am working on right now for next Friday. So to close off this podcast episode, because it is getting long, the last thing I wanted to share is that I have swatched the Garland, the Hobbii Pom Pom yarn that I shared with you in the last episode. And so I decided to swatch the darker black color, which I can't remember the name of it, but it's like the darkest colorway that you can get. This is my swatch on 4mm needles. Swatching for the Sadie sweater from Ozetta. And I do like the fabric. Knitting with it, it does have kind of like a dense cotton core to it, so it does not have as much give as typical, say, 100% wool or alpaca yarns, but pleasant enough because of the alpaca that is surrounding the core. There's still some softness to it. It does feel a little bit prickly, the alpaca, even though this has been blocked, but maybe that's going to be okay in the garment. I don't know. Again, won't know until I knit up a garment and try wearing it. But it does have some prickliness to it, and that's just a little bit unfortunate. I hope it doesn't turn into something that I have to always wear something underneath. I mean, bare minimum, I always wear a tank top or a thin, like sleeveless top under my sweaters. But if it turns into something that I need to wear long sleeve under all the time, that's gonna mean it's something that's only worn during really cold days, and that wasn't the intention of getting something with, cotton content in it. But that's my swatch in case people wanted to see what that color looks like knit up. When I blocked this, there was no like bleeding, or like the water was not black. That's something I always worry about when you have something that's so black, because so much dye needs to be used to create black. But didn't notice that with my little swatch. And there you have it, guys. That is everything that I have been working on since my last episode in, was it mid to early October? We'll see how it goes. Like, I am very determined to finish this kind of bow wrap thing. So today is Friday. I leave next Friday, so realistically, I need to be done by like Thursday night. So we'll see how that goes. It's, single strand. It's like working with single strand mohair. Like, you have just like that thin little core yarn that you're working with. And I felt like I definitely could feel it in my fingers, not necessarily like my wrists or anything. I am using bamboo needles just for that bit of grip and helping me with consistency of my tension. But I'll keep you guys updated on Instagram. If you don't follow me there, that's where I do my little stories and mini updates on anything. But I know this was a long one, guys. But yeah, I had a lot to talk about today. Thanks so much for hanging out with me. If you are still here, thank you, thank you, thank you. But until next time, happy knitting. Bye.